this point.
Also demand ani shamba na chomo de do da tin chora. Descendation.
But now at this point we cannot really help it. We have to cover a little bit of the text, and after that maybe we make some time for questions, some introduction to Buddhism.
Okay. Tadi lay do. Mata dunge. Tongwa si chitang zo mata dunge tong da mi la si ti ko si sra. Mata wala ta kiji inji de ba. Dunge wala ta nga ho ra chi. Chega na chi dunge la. Tongwa la de demba tube gi tongwa. Tongwa se. Chawa sumbe senjong nas. Tende we chawa sumbo sta mata dunge tong da mi ba las. Ta Sangte tangta de lo shu de sar. Ta pe nga zo mata ba la ta kon za ba. Dunge wala dewan za ba. Tongwa la ani khar. Ma tongwa demba tu ban za ba yora. Kisu chawa sombo sanjong chi es te da che ba ina. De da yim tongwa de sanjong chi es. Chu de sene jongwa chi es ra. Chu de sene jongwa chi es. Ti jongwa chi bila de gala tinde jongwa ya ki debu de kan ten tamba sha es jongwa chi es. Chu ne rangshin meba yin la da. Dede chu ni ani trebe rangshin treba da tre ta khala trebe rangshin meba yin la da. Ta treba da namdo da ta dugi treba da tre ware la do dinara.
So now moving on with the text itself, we are at verse number 26. Still following along with the discussion that we had about labels and the manner in which we begin to relate with these labels and how it affects through conceptual elaboration, grasping or apprehending the object as having some sort of intrinsic nature. So number 26, verse number 26 reads, impermanent and suffering and empty, the three designations purifying mind. So now as opposed to realizing that phenomena are impermanent, momentary in their nature, we hold on to phenomena as something permanent. Then similarly, when we are talking about suffering, when we are not mindful of the afflictions which condition these actions that we engage in, then we believe without truly understanding that our actions which are conditioned by afflictions can bring us happiness. And then similarly, empty, we hold things to have some sort of essential nature, essential existence of their own. So as opposed to that, one must begin to contemplate on impermanence, suffering and empty. Empty herein referring to emptiness of essential existence. So impermanent, suffering and empty, three designations purifying mind. But what refines the mind unto its utmost is the teaching that nothing has any self-nature, nothing has any intrinsic nature of its own. So herein, related to our discussions about how one should not relate to the term Dharmadatu as the manner in which we relate to the terms self, male, female, then similarly permanent, impermanent, empty, and so forth. The best way to approach reality as it is, to understand that nothing has any sort of intrinsic nature at all. That's the gist of it.
근데 인디 갈라스나 mata dunge tong da me la tanda nga taban zeba dewan zeba ani da tuban zeba zohi ra to ba pambe goni ani chun she go ba na singe kesi dinde ma ni ko ngoi le chulu yo ba ina thong tu ma resra ye ja dube ge ani duba ma jana thong mutu pe na karasha na chidar dumi to na la dita jinge na pugu jujura ko ye yorde ande di nye gi de dubji ra nyawa na ye cha thong ma yin ba chetan pugu chunju di de nye na ye ba ina thong tu gum des ka san ko de amma gi nye gi togo di dibdi ora 대신 유모지 요베 세상 안저 근데 장대 따다 던제 말아 소베 근데 제가 냠바 단제 두기 딥디와 인자 아니 최지 그 최지 인장 통마이 진짜 춘이 세부 통통만 가서는 단전다 된전다 두고 두르스 배나가 로바도 번제 도 따발라 따번제마다 아니 둥여와라 다 대완점바다 아니 다음에 발라 다도 두 번째 점바 두주기 아니 춘이 통마도 에치 콘주드레스 배나 마잉게는 아니 부구지와는 다 아마게디 저거 두제디기 부구도 두 통통문다 디나시래라
Now moving on, verse number 27. As a child in a pregnant woman's womb is there and yet is not visible, likewise when covered by afflictions, the Dharmadatu is not visible. So we have to relate this to the previous verse. Now if, as opposed to understanding that things are impermanent in their nature, that which is suffering in its nature cannot offer us any sense of happiness or true fulfillment, and that which does not have any intrinsic nature, if we hold it to have some intrinsic nature, then we will not be able to perceive reality as it is. So it's talking about wrong conceptions and how wrong conceptions obscure the true nature of reality. So, for example, the wrong conception of permanence, looking at a transitory network or a transitory collection of causes and conditions as being something permanent. And similarly, looking for happiness in something which is in the nature of suffering. Then similarly, holding things to have some sort of self nature, when in effect it is selfless in its nature.
다 딜러 다다 다기를 링한서 다든 점바다 다기 원점발라 나다 나이 원점발라 쇼 이제 다다 다기 나도기다 간서 다든 점바다 다기 원점바다 아니 민기 드시서 다 간서 지 드레란 파미도 따셔라 나 가시 나도 바 진생로 주든 이거비 진생다 근데 샤라 근데 나도 주고 좋아야스 근데 나도 나도 담는 중에야 아니 좋아다 중지래 좋아 이게 소라다 근데 왜디 가서는 좋아치발에 중에 디바 딱 한데 든 sama 칼라 디바로 셔이더라 세신 다바 토마토인지 디버치바.
Now moving on, verse number 28. From thinking I and mine, and from thinking of names and grounds for these, four conceptual patterns come to be, due to elements and compounds too. Now we are getting at what exactly are the obscurations. What exactly obscures direct perception of reality. So it starts from that conception of I, and when you begin to relate with that conception of the I, then it begins to identify itself with what it calls its own mine, that which belongs to the I. And when you begin to relate to the I and the mine in this manner, then you begin to project labels onto phenomena. And when you begin to project labels onto phenomena, then you also begin to conceptually elaborate the object itself, in effect obscuring the true nature of reality itself with that conceptual elaboration. True is.
So the four patterns you mentioned as I, and then mine, and then the labels, then elaboration of the label. Like they have characteristics kind of.
No, conceptually you begin to impose these characteristics with reasoning, with discursive thoughts, emotions. Tanda kogi nganzogi dela nando shile jisongra, nando shibu chwale tangbodi ngada ngai ngagiwa ra, tada tagiwa, tine tela ming ra, ming la soba taba, junsen da ming la soba taba ra, ene tine nganzo tela tene ne treba ra, toba gi treba, jumba, o ti shibu derwas, re le.
인지는 세보다 안 돼.
Maybe if I read the other translation, do you want to hear the other translation? Through conceptions of a self and mine, discriminations of names and reasons, the four conceptions will arise based on elements and their outcome. Does this make more sense? through conceptions of a self and mine, I and mine, discriminations of names and reasons, the four conceptions will arise based on the elements and their outcome.
Sanje namji mhalam yang silara ta sanje la kasana dupata tewi chuin de la tende de la kasana dada dagi gen zebe hawa mejins wa tende nangdo ya meba hawa meji chenyi mele di tende ta chenyi la di namdo ki de meba che ane di karachana soso rari le di soso rari yehi la sta yehi Jordan Pace, Jordanis, tende sosoto karsam. Sosoto be yehila jira. Te demba imbe ani sanje tapi chuni ista. Tende vedala ani sanje sana de chukusana ani pa kalo. Sanje tapi chuni chance la digala ta tende vita chuni jukut la isra. Tin la isra. Dina kasana taso konje ji se chuna se Sheja las Madupe Peres, Tadiola Malida.
Now, moving forward, what exactly is the overcoming of this obscuration? So, verse number 29, the Buddhas do not perceive any characteristics of their aspiration prayers because the Buddhas are of the nature of self-awareness and have their own permanently pure being. Now, this is a mistranslation when it says self-awareness. It's not self-awareness. The Buddha are of the nature of their own awareness. Self-awareness seems to suggest a self-cognizing consciousness. This is not what it means. Their own awareness. So if we look at the other translation, maybe this is a little bit more helpful. Even the Buddha's aspiration prayers lack appearance and characteristics. Immersed in their very own awareness, Buddhas have the nature of permanence. So as we already discussed before, all these characteristics we superimpose onto the object through the process of conceptualization. Now, the Buddhas, as opposed to that, even when they develop aspirations within their mind stream, their aspirations lack all of these conceptualized characteristics. And as such, they are able to abide in their own awareness. And this abiding in their own awareness has the nature of permanence. Yes.
Tadilaida. Kasana pe kandilana rubongira. Chita rubon goiras. Chita rubon ras ni de bioma maybe ge ani ngazugta rubon rala ni pata on zensha wa rubon ra meba jila ya rubon rala ni ngazugta pan zensha ju. Ti ngazungui ni su ku meba jila zemba ha ko da. Ti na ge taba ni de meba tar chita rubon rala ni ngazug pata sha lo pata sha ju ma do rubon ra di ile meba yomaris. Ti imba na shin se imba tar ra meba tar 대신 취남 단지 장스 대신 인간적 취 단지라 덴버 주변 걸로 요말라 지다 요말라 요말다 대신 취남 단지 장스 그저 주변 항고 마도 아니 따바니데 요마이스 파타는 찐 드로인 아니 요마레스라 너비 넬루 힐루 아니 요마레스.
Now moving on, verse number 30th. Just as the horns on rabbits' heads do not exist except in the imagination, phenomena are all precisely like that, merely imagined, having no existence. Now, herein we have to add the qualifier, having no intrinsic existence. All right? So, when we say horn of a rabbit, it's something non-existent, but we can still imagine it. So similarly, phenomena, even though they do not have intrinsic existence, we imagine it to have some intrinsic existence.
다가 나시기 가서 차려기 두두줄로 드차시 차와이라 차려도 중고이 라데다지 지당 가서 지게 존달을 받는다네 두두 쇼가 참이라 제 망부죠 다 간다 가질라 와서는 두차를 친주지 바이나 야서 차려도 중고이 아니 쇼기 차바 짜가라는 가서 니니야집니다 드나시기 아니 발랑 지당 바다라 드라 랑게라 다 요라 가서 라 요바이나야 파 자가도 실루로 코란 당한 저거 토마나시 딘데 라드 요래라네 요마레스 라 대야 르봉라 나시 페나 때가 나시레스 미마 이슬라 제타라 하진 당아도 인gel라 짜지다시 주마 캔다 타마보지 페샤주주라 제타라 하진 시테젠스 제타 하만 나시기 시스 아닌가 저 따지체네 덴데 아닌 가비 ngobu 양하스 아니 대신도 요마를 다 메스 대라 지시 tabarchas me bachile ani nga jogi chi yorelani pa logi neji karshan tawo yore.
Now moving on, verse number 31. Because they are not made of solid atoms, the horns of oxen cannot be seen either. Since not even tiny atoms exist, how could one imagine that something made of atoms exists? Now this is a very bad translation actually. Maybe we look at this translation. Also, the horns of an ox does not exist as having the nature of particles. All right? Even the horns of an ox do not exist as having the nature of particles. Now, this in turn comes from the assertion that there is not even a particle of inherent existence in phenomena. Okay? So when it says, also the horns of an ox do not exist as having the nature of particles. Because if the horn is indeed the collection of the atoms, subatomic particles and so forth, then the horn of the ox should be found in the subatomic particles. This is what we are looking at. And now, just as we talked about before, how the non-existent horns of a rabbit is merely imagined, then similarly the horn of an ox, which is existent but does not have any intrinsic nature. We cannot find the intrinsic nature even in the particles that make up the horn of the ox, which is an existent phenomena. So, just as before, so it is after. What's to be imagined there?
다딜레이다 때는 중화 조가 가서 텐중이베 최강 강이 바데스라 때는 중화 조와 당스 때는 가바 때는 중화다 때는 가바스나라 가바 조와 나스타르 봉게라 따라서 쟁가기 ngopu 지장다 예바 마이나야스라 따치라 신베 가서 따 오늘 따발라 신 오늘 치발라 신더비 가서디 지바 소소죠 당아저 요네 야 따셔데 로다야네 예바질라 메바 따신 되게 가서 지바 소소죠 라 지발라디 지당이 보고 춘줄라 샤워다 단다 로라 지 장바셔라 민이 지바디질라 집에 제따라 또 벌치 되게 아니 그런 남도가 로다고 그래라 간데스다 때는 좋아하게 가바다 때는 좋아하게 아니 조에게 아니 가르다나라 때는 좋아한 좋아다서 때는 가반 좋아나 직장 예바 마이나 근데기 된지고 추다 파란식 두바다 바다식 타다 제외 근데지 메바 있나야 집어도 저기 남도다 아니 파 뒀다고 그래서 드는 함다 도도도 가르치기들나라 디 참말로 도도로 시에나 최당시 아니 때는 좋아 때중인바 마도 아니 때네 두바
So moving on, since arising is a dependent occurrence and cessation is a dependent occurrence, there is not one single thing that exists. Now we have to add the qualifier intrinsically. There is not one single thing that exists intrinsically. How could the naive believe that there is? So as we extensively discussed before, how all phenomena are depending arising, how all phenomena come about in dependence upon causes and conditions, parts and whole, basis and imputation, and so forth. So as such, there is nothing which exists independently, absolutely, inherently, intrinsically. So how can the naive, the foolish people believe that there is something inherently existent? There is something that is independent. There is something that exists independently as its own. When all manners of production, all manners of cessation are depending arising in themselves.
That's some just body color. Rubong palang la, that rubong rata palang nija nyamda jada. ribon palang rai pes tende ipena nga zo ribon ra la peshanare ani palang la shanare ra ne ribon ra de chitang ngoy ni chile me ba jire ine palang ra nga thani la yore ra ine ya tiya rangun tu ba chitu tu ba de me ba chi pares ribon ra me ba na shi palang phagi yudi ra sing ngon rangun ngon pe yu ngol chitu ba de yo mares 니가 답이 전이 니가 봐 따샤 줘res 라 근데 루모라메 바지랑 루모라 파 따바 나시기 디 바나게 라디아 덴버투바 메발라 가서 덴버투바 파 따샤 줄로네 바나그라다 가 통우다 여바드네 타니도 여바들 메발라고 말아 제달 대히 춘남 지스 제달 대와시비기 아니 추다 우미기 춘남스라 춘남니스 엄마니도 두버치 라디가라 따체지 타니다 제위 아니 타니다 제위에서 집에서 수지오 모르스 아니 두버치라 다 간다 딘데위 칼로다 베드 고랑 아주 pen panang rado jile thani de yo marelana yores ra ona demat ba yorelana yo mares yo marela de yorela uma gala shathu ba de sosu cheo de nga dugu rela isra.
So now moving on, using examples like rabbits and oxen's horn, the thus gone one has proven that all phenomena are nothing other than the middle way. So now herein it is maybe helpful to look at this example of rabbit's horn and ox's horn. So the ox's horn is something that is existent, yes, not intrinsically existent, but existent nonetheless. But the rabbit's horn is something non-existent. It doesn't exist aside from our imagination. But still, in our imagination, it exists. The horns of a rabbit, horns of a rabbit. Now, even if one is existent and the other is non-existent, their nature of lacking any intrinsic nature is similar. So that is exactly the middle way, wherein, as we talked extensively before about the extremes of nihilism and extremes of permanence, wherein we have to be able to posit the existence of phenomena squarely between that, wherein we say that the term as an imputation on the basis exists, but the referent object of that term as something intrinsically existent does not exist at all.
다딜라 카르레드스나 소시바들라 치타라스 펜나 샤이드라 페디카스나 니마체 다와체 카르마 든주기 주니제 펜니다도 야 난칼라 샤운드가 아니 마기 출라 디 칼로 주니 샤오 펜나 사나고라 추나가 다와 주니 샤기도 다 간다 출라 마마기 타이나 치타라 니다 카르미 주스 니마다 다와다 카미 주 당위 뇌지 추나다는 펜나 저기 가요로 근데 취지샤네 아니 다와디나 샤추나 마기레 주니지 샤기라 근데 주니데 응문에 고나게 니마다 다와다 까마 주샤파 다가라 아니 니마다 다와 까마레라나 마라 취 뇌지 나도 그래 취 뇌지 말아 당위 뇌지 취나도라 근데 당시 장외게 뇌게 나도 아니 거기 샤와데 예스라 주니 통화 조와 따르 먼저 주니 통고라마도 바기딜 아니 니당은이레라나 마레와스 내가 나시 나도 단다 통되지 응고부도 줘야 아주로 홀란 하되고 그러면도 지체 체니바 아니 페 칼 랑은 두바디 요 말했으라 체니 조방 대단달라디가라 지당이 추도 줘야 데버 두병고나 요 말에 페나 니마다 다와카마게 주니 추나 샤바나시 디 주니 샤주디 마로 티 멤바나시레.
Now, moving on, just as one sees the forms of sun, moon, and stars reflected in vessels of perfectly clear water, so is the consummation of signs and characteristics. So signs and characteristics herein refers to the signs refers to the object, characteristics refers to the characteristics that we project onto the object. So now this is important to reflect on, the manner in which we talked about the reflection. So we mindlessly begin to say that the reflection in the mirror is us, one. Now similarly, when we look at the reflection of the sun, moon and stars and so forth in water, in a perfectly clear, stable water, if we begin to say that the reflection is the sun, the reflection is the moon, the reflection is the stars, then does it make sense? Not at all. Not at all. That doesn't make sense at all. So similarly, the manner in which the appearance of objects in our mind, if we equate the appearance of objects in our mind with something intrinsically existent, objective, appearance of the object with objective existence itself, then it's similar to confusing the reflection of the stars, confusing the reflection of the stars with stars themselves.
That's you need to Thoma Patan Thama Ge Karsa Thoma Watan Targe was Loa Meji Temba Tesra Temba Yis Kanshi Ladi Umi Chu Kanshi Teter Da Meji Da Meba Tenra Da Meba Teans Chita Dada Dagir Tas Chitangi Chungu Nitul Pigila Data Tubachi Meba in a ra Seshi Tamba Tendeji by Nanzo Namto Drotani ani dada dagiwegi pa dibe chiu resra chida dada dagi ta tilapang na to drota wa le yusra pen di od la kalana chita suki anzo nim suga ni ma sha yin digala ani yu chipchi le chida suki dus chis ta odanda dikas tin sama chita suki dus chile digala ani suga di namchi chabo yin digala chila ngazo ani trolan ye chi imba chi bachila yan zamza chu di chawdu la zamza chu tagarala ya thamodu la ligdas wa trowo shini jeba chis trowodu la chu chawdu la res ya teni thawi thusini chu tagarala yin bachila ya thawi thusina ya thamo re la ya jugi res ye chi chi tagarala ya chawa da thawa ni ba jugi res ra te jeba na ji pena nga jogi la chita da me chang as chi che tang as thimi las chi thima pen chi khora ranshi ki thima da shuyo mara chi khora thima me bara thima me ba ine ya tele lobu dune tiche cha de ora tende gi chi chik po la ya ani simjen dang sa je la ni ta ba na shi res kansa chik la da thima da de because kola ani simjen la ores thima da ma de because sa je la ores te na shi gi chi chik la ya ani thyu gi che ba ora en zamza chudu chawdule zanza thamudule chud tagarane tende lagdos tende jile peja ges.
Now, moving on, we read the next three lines together, 35, 36, and 37. That which is virtuous in the beginning, middle, and end is undeceiving and is marked by constancy and is free from self in this very way. So how could that be thought of as I or mine? So we make sense of this first. If we look at the other translation, then verse number 35 reads along the line of virtuous throughout beginning, middle, and end, undeceiving and steady. What's like that is just the lack of self. So what is virtuous through beginning, middle, and end, undeceiving and steady? That is exactly the lack of self. That is the lack of intrinsic nature. That's the true reality itself. So how can you conceive that true nature of reality, it as self and mind? So this is talking about how we fail to perceive the true nature of reality through the conception of I and mine. When the conception of I and mine is formed, it precisely obscures the true nature of reality. Now moving on, just as water during summertime is spoken of as being something warm, and the very same water throughout the winter season is spoken of as being something cold. Those ensnared in the net of afflictions are referred to by the label sentient beings. The very same freed of states afflicted are Buddhas, as Buddhas are revered. So it's talking about how the Dharmadhatu, or the clear light of the mind, is not diminished or destroyed by the afflictions which surround it. So we use the example of a river flowing in the summer, and if we say that the river flowing in the summer is something warm, and as such we say it's warm, then similarly the same river flowing in the winter, when we touch it, it's cold. Now if we begin to say that this river is warm in the summer, cold in the winter, but if we say that these are intrinsic characteristics of the river itself, that doesn't make sense. And it also doesn't make sense to say that this destroys the characteristics of the river. warm and it being warm in the summer, it being cold in the winter, because the river flows nonetheless. So similarly, when our minds and the true nature of our mind is obscured by the afflictions, then we are sentient beings, samsaric beings. When the true nature of our minds, is realized, actualized, free from these afflictions, then we are referred to as the Buddhas.
Tanda diga sum sodeng de la nyumo chawe nyumo di nganzo tawa la diga la nganzo tanda di chi jado jo sum je sum sai tinde tile ja shani nyumo di ge jadi ge kap sha diga la we ne thong thong mara chesa nyumo chawe yo ba nes sinjen shi ne je ba yes chesa nyumo ba di ge di we ne ka la ya ani dende ka sa de la sinjen la wa resra ani teni nyumo tejunas tende simje tagarala ani raju gi nyumo ba tende danze da denze la so ta tende lo ba treba ina ani sanje shin de jibar chelle ta ingela tagarare da kansa chikla ta dang chile
Now herein we are talking about how enlightenment is basically achieved on the basis of this very mind, if we put it in a nutshell. So we use the example of the water being cold in the winter, water being warm in the summer, to highlight that fact that the qualification we add onto it being warm or cold is on the same basis, that water itself. Yes? So similarly, whether we call beings sentient beings or enlightened beings, it's the same on the basis of the same mind. Now, as it is in the case of the water, when it's warm, we begin to call it warm. When it's cold, we begin to call it cold water. Then similarly, with beings, beings are called sentient beings because they are trapped in the net of afflictions. So as such, they are not able to actualize the true nature of the mind. Then similarly, when beings are able to overcome the afflictions and actualize the true nature of the mind, then they are referred to as an enlightened being, a Buddha.
Mita zula tene ne sra mita zula tene ne tima maybe san hawa jungs de tende mita zula temba yes tima maybe na jula de tende yose ranshin is hawa juwa inza ani ta kanda dile yudura yose sendi ani chewa me ba da gaba me ba ni res ra tende wa de thonwa de sna nenjo pa thon res ra rashi tu chewa yo ma gaba yo ma de nenjo pa thon res ani cheji in ani chin sam muto bi shiji shebanji tende ani kalor demba tu be ani chewa da demba tu be gaba me ba de nenjo pa tende ani chuni shi ti shi tu re res ra.
So now moving on, verse number 38. When I and form assume their right relation, appearances appear without a blur. Since these neither arise nor cease, they are the Dharmadatu, though they are imagined to be otherwise. So herein, when it says, since these neither arise nor cease, we have to add the qualifier, since these neither inherently arise or inherently cease. So herein, we are talking about how that very basic quality of the mind, being clear light, makes it possible for appearances to occur in the mind itself. So when form and I assume the right relation, appearances appear without a blur. Since these neither intrinsically arise nor cease, they are the Dharmadatu, form I, and though they are imagined to be otherwise, because we hold form to be intrinsically existent, we hold the I and the I sense consciousness to be something intrinsically existent. Now, if we are to understand the true nature of consciousness itself and true nature of its object, then we have to realize the lack of intrinsic nature of both object and subject. And this is not immediately realized. This kind of direct perception is only achieved by yogis, and this is why we call the direct perception of emptiness, the yogic direct perception.
Tadi dinner later. Chuji in the dratans nawa latenis ra. Drata nawa lateni number tabi sheba sum ladigal. Pesi shemba ne yu de yuchin da rari do shashara. Tati kande takta jingi hagum do. Ani chenyi maybe chuji is the later, number two but the conzo the maybe ani chuji is toda jeba toje and toje the tomi lajura. Tandadika so tobi is ye she dance jebe ani turbanjur dos later. I think in the tapa latum in the tona hande.
The double jitid. So the double jitid. So verse number 39, when sound and air assume their right relation, a consciousness free of thought occurs. These three are in essence the Dharmadatu, free of other characteristics, but they become hearing when thought of conceptually. Do we understand this?
I was going to ask if you could repeat your translation for 38 before moving on.
Tayang di sum sobje di anjo gone chik laro chidas ra. Tangai la jud di anjo laro chidas. Maybe Geshema can repeat it. I can.
Subject.
Subject.
Ale. Mig tangal. Chitanga migi karazula tawa chena migi zu tora. Tapi nanga mig la sha. Pena nanga ambonga na pena nawa ge dala nya bada. Migi zula tawa da. Anhagi ani tila nya wa. Chegi rola nya wa. Tende chita zu mashi ge she jinse de ra. Hina tanda kandejla jage na haumdra. Mi da zula tene ne sra. Mi dia zula pa tene ne. Tima maybe san hawan jung la digala. Tati tima maybe hawan jung la di yuse la shaidura. Yuse in hawa ani dinde sulan jung was nenjo palan jung la. Sik shimba ta wud dinde do shadura. Ani di kasne yuse chi is sem chemi chewa me para. Chewa me ba dinde yuse ki sendi chewa me ba da ani gaba me ba. Ni les dinde ni le ani dus ni 통화 레스타 근데 아니 가밤에 칼로 timami na tanda nga du se senjorwa ti chawame bada gabame ba ni thongwa le stende thongore ti karasana cheji ine ani sem mutobi yeshi tene redu shele da mutobi sendi antende shi thugure le sara tende chede chawame bada gabame ba ta demba to be lagora.
So now verse number 38. When I and form assume their right relation, appearances appear without a blur. Since these neither arise nor cease, they are the Dharmadatu, though they are imagined to be otherwise. So we make sense of the first two lines. When I and form assume their right relation, appearances appear without a blur. Now blur or stain herein is referring to conceptual elaboration. So when the I sense consciousness and its object, which is always form, and on the basis of that, there is an appearance of form in the consciousness. Yes? So when these assume their right relationship, free from all conceptual elaboration, then that's an appearance without stain. Even though there is appearance, there is no conception of true existence at that moment. Yes? Conception. Even though there is appearance, there is no conception of true existence, of sound, or of form, as well as the eye sense itself. Okay? And that kind of perception, wherein even though there is appearance of form and other things, there is no conception, there is no stain of conceptual elaboration. That kind of perception is the yogic direct perception. When you have overcome all your obscurations, all your afflictions. And at that moment, you begin to also realize that that basic quality of the mind being clear light, which facilitates the appearance of forms, objects in the mind, is itself not intrinsically produced, is itself not intrinsically, does not intrinsically cease. So at that point, you begin to realize that all forms, all sense, all appearances in themselves are the Dharmadatu. have the nature of lack of intrinsic existence in them, though they are imagined to be otherwise. We imagine it to be otherwise. Thus, similarly, now when we look at verse number 39, it makes more sense now. When sound and air assume the right relationship, a consciousness free of thought occurs actually. At that moment, when there is no conceptual elaboration at all, when sound and air makes contact, a consciousness free of thought occurs at that moment. A perception, a true perception occurs in a yogic direct perception. All right? And these three are in a sense the Dharmadatu, because at that point there is no conceptual elaboration at all. So it's free from stain. So as such, it's a true perception, free from conception. All right? Now we are making we have to differentiate. You see a spectacle. Seeing the spectacle as it is, nakedly, that's a direct perception, but that's a very conventional direct perception. Because even though there is a direct perception of the object, there is an element, as we discussed before, wherein the meaning generality, the generic image of the glass that we have already created in our head, is mixed in that direct perception. Now, as opposed to that, the yogic direct perception sees the lack of intrinsic nature in the object directly. So as such, it doesn't employ the use of a generic image in the head, no thought at all, directly as it is. Huh? Define not knowing. Define not knowing. Mm. Not just labels, that generic image of sound that we have. Now, sound, maybe we do not say generic image, we say sound generality. As opposed to meaning generality with regards to form, there is a sound generality. So, being free from that sound generality, being able to, not only being free from that sound generality, but being able to see the object as it is, its true nature, not just conventional reality of the object, but its true nature, lack of intrinsic nature. That's what we mean by direct perception, more particularly yogic direct perception. Huh? Now, we wouldn't exactly technically call that not knowing, because that's actually knowing reality as it is, but free from thought. So how would you differentiate between knowing and perception?
Here I'm understanding perception as the conceptual framework, but like direct perception would be free of those impositions of language and free of those impositions of language where you just see it as if you're seeing it for the first time, without the
Not first time, but as it is.
It can feel like that.
Now, who can attest to that?
It can feel like that freshness, which is what I'm understanding as not knowing, because you don't have your whole framework rooted in time of this is how it is, this is how it should be. So that is why I am describing it as understanding it as that, this freshness.
Yeah, maybe that's one way of understanding it, not knowing, feeling that it is like for the first time you are seeing it, maybe. Tene kurang di lawar nganzogi yu tok la du zamba nganzogi da nenjo ngusum tok la di rata tanda. Nenjo ngusum gi nganzogi yu tok la di shawra. Namju nganzogi ni ngusum tok ba la du zamba nganzogi ju la ngusum tok ba ji yores. Yena di twenji daji la so ba nyam do de ra de son ring wal ta ne ni nganzogi to yin yores. Chenza dina la tok ba gi cha yu deres. Kongusum yena yas. Ta tanda nganzoka zo ba be she gi nenjo ngusum tok ba la di
Tokpa
Tokpa
di namdo da chewa ra. Tanda nga zo kari towa nga zo di tos le war di Tila tenji den regon to de ra. Kinda dinga lo shekab da nga thong da ngos sebu ma bu ka ta ta thong do sang wo de tenji ten den regon to dang ju ra. Ra tenji de ten den regon to de. Ta ding lori mata lori apa mata na kali khabu da. Nga khari ne ra gen hawa she khari to ne ra gen hawa de ra tu gon. Ani tende jin zaba pena ta nen jeng ngos tende na ko to 똑바 maybe gon ra 똑바라 와다 남도라 그래 어디 나와라 튀고 gon 또 말 아주 또 오는데 나와라 depend ten지 튀고 gon 또 되니 제발.
So herein it is very strange if we look at the manner in which we say we perceive something. All right, we wouldn't even use the term I am directly perceiving it. We simply say I perceive this. Yes, and then we equate with it knowing, equate perception with knowing it. Now, if we think really carefully about it, there is an element of conceptual thought already involved here. When we begin to say that, oh, I know this, right? Right? So this is the manner in which we directly perceive things when we say it is with the intermediary of a sound or a meaning generality that we begin to perceive this. Now, the yogic direct perception that we are talking about here is free from all conceptuality. It is able to cognize, perceive the object directly as it is. Now, with that being said, it is not the case that things appear differently to them. There is the same appearance, but there is lack of conception. Now, if we have to truly make sense of this, rather than making sense of yogic direct perception as such, we need to first look at the manner in which we perceive things, and how exactly does that form knowledge of things. So from a Buddhist perspective, there's a whole separate study of this called mind and mental factors, mind and awareness. So it's about how the mind engages its objects, and the different ways in which this gives rise to a knowledge of the object.
penang zo kyang ha shi le mi thong wo ma de kyang ha ma theni do as theni ye ba jin se tele teni kyang ha ma pa ma ngo su tu ni pu de do den se ye ba le teni zo kyang ha ma ye ba ha ko go da jin se le ten to de ge nam ja ma bu do.
So herein maybe you would appreciate the manner in which we approach this investigation about object subject, and the manner in which the subjective consciousness engages the object, and how that manner of engagement effectively decides the type of knowledge that is gained about the object. All right. So in Buddhism, in a classical monastic setup, you first there is a text called the Collected Topics. In Collected Topics, you are now trying to make sense first of the terms. Okay, the terms of debate, the terms of philosophy, and so forth. But you debate about these terms nonetheless, starting from color, shape, and so forth. Okay, all right, and then moving on. After you complete all that, then you begin to approach mind and awareness. Okay, and in this we talk about mind and the different mental factors, and the different types of cognition: valid cognition, invalid cognition, direct cognition, inferential cognition, and so forth. And after that, you begin to now examine science and reasoning. Now herein, correct science and reasonings. What exactly is a logical reasoning? Logical reasoning. So in this manner, you begin to make sense of the manner in which we apprehend object, the manner in which objects appear to us, and how the manner in which it appears affects the subjective consciousness, and how the manner in which the subjective consciousness apprehends the object affects the perception of the object.
Is there a specific text I could study for this?
Now, these three, they are very, they should be studied ideally step by step, I think. So at first, if you are looking for the first, there is a book called Debate in Tibetan Buddhism. Debate in Tibetan Buddhism. And it's this thick. In Tibetan, it's this thin. But if you really spend time with it, then you will really make sense of it. I would really advise, I would recommend it. Konzo duda daya ina la ra injina la na duda pina la joji injina la da konzo gi deba do jurjo dagas chiyor. Ina duda nganzo pecha da dagas mashiyo mara. So I'm saying in the original Tibetan, the text for collected topics is only this thin. But in English, it becomes like this. Debate. Yes, if you are interested, there are debate. In October, there will be like a 2-month intensive debate course here.
3 months, right?
3 months.
There? Just there? In English?
In English, and you wouldn't get a better teacher, I can assure you. Atisha is teaching.
Atisha is teaching for 3 months.
Yeah, but they missed the Buddha part then. But it's available online, so when you are interested, you can start to keep up with the online teaching from last year. You can join us in
That's your advertisement now.
Is there anyone who has studied everything which is there in Buddhism? Because it seems like a lot of
네 Nagarjuna 요조 창마여라. 슝 창마 따냥교 민데 요래스다.
마치 층이 좀 참았다.
생이 지분 말해. 슝 거랑 도거랑 창마 따냥교던데.
아, 네 요절 됐는데. 이제.
Yeah, they are.
How do you finish all of this in like one lifetime?
You have to spend your whole lifetime studying it then. There is no other way.
지단계에다 나가서 바신 오만주 도와 참 뭐지요라. 그래서 저한테 질을 타마들 나가서 gelti lamrin로 따위네 쪼코용 좀 뒤유를 해다. 상마치 가사칸이 쓰드는 바 도도도 좀 해다.
And that there are people who have already or dedicated themselves to study the whole of the sutras is evident in the texts that exist. For example, when we look at a text like Lamrim, it's basically a comprehensive overview of the whole of the sutra.
근데 도나이와 있는 지단계 층이 좀 차상 지장이나라 담보 드라자 드라로직 아니 따리로 말 로리로직 따리로직 로숨차사 파신 로투 아니 아 오말로숨라 즈로숨 도알로숨 다칸달로 니슈츠 장오라 근데 자에
If you are really serious about it, you have to be willing to dedicate your next 20 years of your life to it.
I just do what I can for this one.
So I'll be 40 by the time I'm done.
That's okay. That's okay. Because when we are talking that hangbo tagri go zura mare thangbo duda, you start from the collected topics.
로직이라
That's 1 year, okay? It's a textbook. It's a monastic textbook, and there is no one set textbook. Even among many different monasteries, many different traditions, they have their own textbook. But it is called the collected topics. All different monasteries have different authors. But collected topics, you spend 1 year. After collected topics, mind and awareness.
로리
Lorik.
로리로직
1 year for mind and awareness. And then science and reasonings. Science and reasonings.
로직
1 year. 3 years here. And then
되네 파신 로디
then the perfection, the paramitas, the perfection sutras. Sutras. You spend the next 7 years.
되게 오말로숨
Then the Madhyamika philosophy. 3 years for that.
아니 이제 아비담 고시 필로스.
Then the Abhidharma literature.
아비담 고시.
3 years for that.
되는 더 로직.
Then the Vinaya, the ethical code of conduct, 1 year. The ethical code of conduct, 1 year.
되는 단도 따와 있는 하 로직.
Then if you still want to study, then you can fit in a year of Tantra, study of Tantra.
이네야다 디 고바기 샤드펜 도마니도 있는 데네 파신 줄로 되는다 오라야. 가시엔 고바 가실래 때 슬로 뉴 따게스.
The monastic institute themselves decide the syllabus.
Then you start your guest degree.
Then only then you.
이네 개말 지난주 미제레 디스미 엔데 지나라 소소게 준주도 소소로라니 가요라요게 펜바 준주도 저로는 빼아버 라 디슬 빠비 소소 사마바이죠 아니 람랭가다 오즈라 지단 람랭라 심바간서야 대바면은 뜻고 가고 이기래 람랭도 내가 소소 기때 배우드네 로야라 남아도 쇼디체셔지던데 로네 나 지난주 셈발에 펜라 다양 로몬보지 장에 뜻어요 말아.
Now, with that being said, as lay people, it is important to be practical and realistic. So, as such, if you are really interested and enthusiastic about your study of Buddhist philosophy, then maybe we look at comprehensive works such as Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Bodhicharya Avatara, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, and if you can, it will be very, very helpful to look at the Lamrim literature too, the Stages of the Path literature. Lamrim, Lamrim. Lamrim. Shantideva's Bodhicharya Avatara, Engaging the Deeds of the Bodhisattva. Deeds, the actions of the Bodhisattvas. Yes, same. So, book for Buddhist psychology. There is a book called Buddhist Psychology by Geshe Tashi. It's a good book. Tashi. Tashi, Tashi, Tsering. Thank you.
Okay.
Tea break, okay.
Tea break time?
Yeah.
Then answer question.
Then question and answer session after that.